everyone, it's me. My name is Jana. I'm a dark fantasy artist and illustrator, mostly working in books nowadays, and this is my procrastination chat where I procrastinate working on one of the 300,000 projects I should be working on right now, while you may draw or do whatever while you listen to me rambling on and on and on and on and on and on. Why is there a fruit fly circling me? Never mind. This is real here. Everything is real. So yeah, I have been asked to talk a bit about my process when working with clients, starting with a brief and going to the final, and that's awesome and that's cool and that's what we're gonna do today. But I'm also going to talk about a few other things that I think are super important if you're about to start working for clients, or especially if you're about to start working with your very first client, or you're working with your first major client, because this is a point where it's not just about the craft, right? It's also about the mind, especially if you're one of these anxious types like me, because this is such a moment where all the good stuff like imposter syndrome just can come to the surface, even if you're keeping it cool most of the time. Because in my experience, when you get hired for a job, there's this first initial feeling when you're getting that inquiry, that email that's like, hey, I'm art director working at big publisher, and I have this really cool project that I think would be great for you, and it sounds like it really is great for me. Oh my god, it's all the things I love. It sounds awesome. We're going to pay you multiple $1,000s for it. Awesome! You're gonna keep your copyright. Awesome! So you're really hyped up and you're like, oh my god, this is amazing, this is amazing, this is amazing, and you agree, and I know, then you get the paperwork handled and all this stuff, and then when the initial hype has calmed down, there's this other version of you that's just sitting there and it's like, I actually have to do the work now. Because it feels like you're two people. It's like the person who says yes and awesome and cool, and then the next day there's the other person, like you've had a hangover and you're like, what did I do yesterday? Now I have to do the work. And that's when all the nasty bits of your brain just start rumbling around, and there's, oh my god, what if I have no ideas? I always have ideas, but what if this time I have zero idea and this is such a huge project? Or what if my painting turns out horrible because all the good paintings I've done in the past were just happy accidents because I was just messing around. I can't actually paint. I don't actually, what's anatomy? What's perspective? I'm just kind of making it all up. I'm just kind of muddling my way through, and I somehow ended up with a portfolio that looks good, but that's just because that's just my good work. They hired me for the good work. They don't know all the terrible work I've done that I'm capable of. They don't know how bad I can be. What if this is the moment where I'm just gonna produce the most horrendous work, and everyone in the industry is going to know what a hack I actually am? And also, I have so many cool and talented friends, or acquaintances on the internet who are also illustrators, who could have also done this job, and they would have done a grandiose artwork for it. It would have been fantastic. Why didn't they hire them? Why did they hire me? Oh my god, I'm never gonna work again, am I? This fun stuff. I think I used grandiose incorrectly. That's what happens when you don't have a script. Anyways, moving on. So that's the situation we're in, right? We're terrified. Our brain is doing weird shit, and we're gonna have to calm down. So yeah, that's like step 0 before you start working. is to calm down and kind of find the confidence and the calm to actually do the work without being terrified all the time, because that's no fun. And we want this job to be fun. Like, one of the things I talk about in my illustration, freelance illustration workshop, is that if we want to make shitty money and be unhappy, we could have any shitty job, right? We don't need to make it extra hard for ourselves and choose illustration as a career. Like, we can be miserable for, way less effort. So we want this job to be actually fun and not be just terrified all the way through. And I have found that there are a few things that are really helpful before if you're kind of stuck in this mindset. And the first of them is, now especially when it comes to imposter syndrome, is that the person who hired you has done so for a reason. They've seen your portfolio, maybe they've seen your social media, so maybe they actually know that you can do bad drawings, but they also smart and they know that maybe a terrible sketch in your sketchbook is not the same as a beautiful book cover in your portfolio, right? They understand context, because that's the other thing. The person who's hired you is smart. Maybe if they're a designer or an art director or a creative director or something, they're not just smart, it's literally their job to hire artists. And they've seen your work and they trust that you can do the job. And I feel like you can have the courtesy to them, to trust them back, to have made a good choice when hiring you, because it's literally their job to hire the best artist for the project, and they decide it's you. And if you can't trust yourself to do the job, you can trust them. Like, trust them instead. You don't have to trust yourself, trust them to be professional, to know what they're doing. And if they're not professional, if they're a self-publishing author, for example, I mean, they're also professional but not professional art director, then trust them that they wanted you as the artist. They're putting money on the line, right? And if you're not being exploited, it's a significant amount of money for a person and an individual to pay out of pocket, right? Because for a company, a few thousands are fine, but an individual author saying, yes, you're worth like $1,000 or more because I trust you, I know your work, it's great, and I want you to do this. Trust them to know their own taste, right? Trust them, trust their opinions and their choice in the matter. And I felt like this shift in perspective has been really helpful, especially in the beginning. Because back then I couldn't trust myself. I do now. I now know that it's all gonna be all right, I can trust the process and so on and so forth, and we'll get to that. But that was a mindset shift that really helped me early on. It's just, if you can't trust yourself, that's fine. Trust the other person. Trust they know what they're doing. Now, the second part is, well, you're always working as a team when you're working on a cover. It's always a collaborative effort. Even if you're just working with a self-publisher, then you're a team of two, right? It's not just they send you a briefing and then you just come up with a cover and you paint it, it's all beautiful, and that's it. It's always a collaborative effort. You're always on a team and you're always working towards the same goal, and the same goal is to create the best possible cover for this book. So the goal really is to sell a lot of books, right? With self-publishers, it's sometimes more sentimental, so I would more think the goal is to create a cover that the author really loves, right? It's more personal because you're working directly with the author. But if you're working with a bigger team, because you're working with a designer or the art director, and they're also working with a team who you're not going to talk to, you're just going to talk to maybe one or two people, which is great because otherwise it would get really complicated. So they're doing all the hard work of talking with the other people. So thank you for all that you're doing. So yeah, you're on a team and you have the same goal, right? And the goal is best cover artwork for this project, for this book. And you're aligned in that. And there are two elements here. The first element is you're not alone. They have your back. But the other side is, of course, that you also need to have their back, because they're putting something on the line by trusting you. And for, again, a self-publisher, that might just be money. I say just money. It's probably a significant amount of money to them. And for designers, art directors who work in publishing, it's not necessarily their job, but it's also kind of the trust that their superiors have in them to choose the right artist. So you have to make sure that you hit your deadlines and you do the best work that you can. You don't have to do perfect work, but you need to do the best work that you possibly can at this moment. And again, that's not being perfect, right? Sometimes the situation is you can't even do the best possible work that you could have ever done as a human, right? Your best possible work is probably still, years ahead of you. But at this moment, with the resources that you have and the knowledge that you have, you do the best you can. And that's all anybody can expect from you. That's fine. It even means, like, if you're going through depression and you can't whip up the best work ever, it's still the best you can do in this moment, right? That's all you can expect from yourself. So that's one thing. Now, the other part is, so I said, you're a team, you're working together, you're not alone. And I'm blacking out on the other thing, it was important. That's also what happens when you don't have a script. Wait a sec. Intermission. Hi, so as we're having this little intermission, I wanted to take the time to thank Ita for asking about this topic, and also for thanking this little girl, because you've been sleeping. Yeah, you've been sleeping all the way through recording. Thank you so much. If any of you have questions, just write them in the comments. That's what the comments are for. Thank you. I got it. So the second aspect of this being a collaborative effort with an aligned goal is that you need to put your ego aside, right? It's not about you. It's not about you creating the most perfect, beautiful, fantastic artwork ever. First up, you can't really control that. Again, sometimes your work ends up being the best ever and sometimes it just doesn't. Sometimes the stars need to align. But it means that if you get feedback and maybe you're like, I don't really know about that, I think my idea was better, you still try to apply the feedback. And in my experience, the revision always looks better. Because other people just sometimes see something that you don't, or they just have more experience in the market than you do. And so in moments where you get feedback or you get criticism of your work, and usually people are really, really nice, so nobody's gonna shout at you, they're gonna be like, oh, you're horrible, how did you ever dare sending this in? That has never happened to me in my career. I sometimes sit there and when I send something and it's like, oh my god, what if they hate it? Oh my god. But if they hate it, it's still gonna be like, thank you for sending this in, this is awesome, we just have, these 10 points we'd like you to adjust, and so everyone's really polite and nice to you, so don't worry about that. And even in that moment, you might be like, oh my god, I really blew this artwork is really not that good, they hated it, oh my god. But it's not about you having delivered a terrible artwork. In this moment, it's not about you having failed, it's about moving the project along. It's about you now applying their requests applying their feedback and making it better, because you're in this together and it's not about you and your emotions, it's about creating the best artwork for the job. And the notes are, what we currently have is not good enough, or it's went into the wrong direction or something like this. So it's not about you. And by just accepting that and realizing for yourself, yes, your name might be on the artwork in the end, but it's always a group effort. That's why when you do a cover reveal as an illustrator, like when you proudly post the artwork you've done for a cover, you usually also credit the designer and the art director and whoever else significantly contributed to the project, because they did contribute. Maybe some idea came from the designer or the art director, or they had like a brilliant twist on one of your concepts. These things happen. You're not alone in this. Awesome, it's not all on you, so pressure is off, but you still got to deliver, and you need to put your ego aside for that, right? It's a team effort, and you need to be a team player, and you can create the most fantastic, beautiful work that's perfectly aligned with your own vision for your portfolio in your free time. But when you're working on a project, it's about creating the best artwork for the project as a team, and you got to trust your teammates and they got to trust you. And I find that very enjoyable. I love working with a team on a book cover. And it's a bit funny to me, because when I was still in art school, my drawing teacher gave me a critique for one of my illustrations. Actually, it's one of my most famous ones, the Banshee. And he told me, when you're doing this as a professional, you need to be able to do this on your own, because you're working on your own. You're the only person who decides, when this is done, when this is finished, and is doing these critical decisions on your artwork. And I think it shows that he works a lot in the German market, because in my experience that's just not the case, because my word on my artwork is not the last. That's of whoever approves it, right? And there are always people who will, give you notes and who will give you hints. Like, they're not going to nitpick, I don't know, elbows and knees, right? But they're still gonna give you notes, and they're gonna give you direction. And you're not alone. You're not sitting there alone, and you get the brief and you have to just magic up the perfect book cover. That's just never the case, right? That's why you're not AI, right? It's not like the commissioner prompts and you just spit out artwork. That's not how it works. It's a team effort, and it's a process, and you gotta trust that process. And now we're at the process stage. Hooray! So yeah, I need to have my timer. So I have a timer this time to make sure the video doesn't just cut off at some point. So yeah, because that's the thing. You don't have to magically come up with a final artwork. So if you're worried about not having the perfect idea or not being up to the task, I feel it's really beneficial to just think about just the next step, because there are so many little steps that lead up to the final book cover, right? And you just need to make it to the next one. And as it usually is when you turn a big project into lots of tiny steps, the next step is always pretty manageable. So when I get a brief, right, of course I read the brief. And usually when it's a big publisher, they're going to send you like a PDF, and it'll have all sorts of information like title, what kind of edition is this going to be, what's the target audience, what's the genre, are there certain elements that are supposed to be on the cover, what are comp titles. So comp titles, I think comp stands for comparative quite frankly, I've never looked that up. They're just comp titles. And so there are two kinds of comp titles. Ones are more like comp covers. So it's like, these are similar covers on the market, and we kind of want something going into that direction. And the other kind of comp titles are like editorial more, and they're more like, oh, these are similar books on the market that have similar content, similar stories, and so on. Those are the two comps. So you'll have that. Usually you might sometimes have a mood board, you sometimes have character descriptions, you have maybe excerpts from the text if there's something important in there. So that's what you usually get if you're working with a larger publisher. You sometimes get a lot less depending on who you're working with. You sometimes get the entire manuscript to read. I personally like reading the manuscript. I feel like you just get a better idea of the general vibe of the project, because an art director can write the best, the best PDF for you, the best briefing ever. They will have a different impression of the material. And sometimes, if the book hasn't been written yet, for example, I think that sometimes the vibe of the summary and so on can be very different from the actual book in the end, and that can be a problem, but we're not going to get into that. So let's assume you're getting the manuscript and you're getting this full briefing with everything you need to know. So the first step is just take in all this information you just got. And I also always advise on taking notes. If you get a PDF and it has all your information on size and whatnot, I would always take it down into the notebook or sketchbook. I have like sketch notebooks, they're both, and I always write down the important information again, so I have it in the notebook as well, and I don't need to look it up again. I also look it up again, but I like having all the important data there. And one of those reasons is it takes me no effort, no brain effort. I literally just take notes. I'll just be like, this is the title of the project, those are our main characters, it needs to be, I don't know, wraparound, whatever. So that's a start. That's getting rid of the blank paper. It's a start in my sketchbook. It's a sign to myself we're starting a new project. And that's that. So, and then I'm gonna read the manuscript and I'll take notes. So if you've ever, been in school and you're like in German lessons or language lessons, I don't know, it would have been English lessons for you probably, or whatever, the subject which is your native language, and you're doing stuff like analyzing poetry. I don't know, lots of folks, I liked analyzing poetry, but I know lots of folks are like, why are we learning this? You'll never need that later in life. You do need that if you want to become a book illustrator, because you don't need to analyze it that hard, right? But you kind of pick out the important themes and vibes and elements and symbolism. And again, this is something you really can only do when you get to read the manuscript, because you can actually pick up on all these things. And you pick up on them in a way that is meaningful to you and that you see, because the art director might have read the novel. I actually don't know if they do. Probably like sometimes not. And they're picking up on other things. And you're picking up on the things that are more potent to you. And that's also why I like reading the manuscript. And so, right, so you're going through the manuscript, you're analyzing it a bit, you're picking up the important themes and imagery, and you're taking notes. And suddenly you have an entire different foundation from where you started with, right? Because you just had like a paragraph of brief and maybe this PDF, but now you have this entire body of notes. And while you've read the manuscript, or while you've done your research maybe and some background topics that are going to be important for the cover, your brain has started working, especially if you don't do everything in one day. If you're reading a novel, you might not do that in one sitting, and you get to go to sleep and have your subconscious do a little bit of work for you, which I'm always for. It's useful, so use it. And so by the time you're done with all this, you already have a bunch of material, and it's not necessarily good. It doesn't mean you have the final perfect sketch in there already, but you have material. You have something to work with. And that's where I would sit down and then, based on that, start making actual rough sketches for cover concepts. And they're really, really rough. We're talking stick figures here. I'm not sending that to the client, that's just for me, and it's really rough, really quick, and I'm going through multiple ones, and I'm not one of the people who are like, you need to fill like 10 pages of thumbnails and then pick the best one. They're called thumbnails because they're like really small sketches that are like the size of the thumbnail, which is not quite accurate. My sketches are at least 3 thumbnails, I'd say 6 thumbnails in size, but anyways, not important, y'all, not important. There are people who are very adamant about trying to squeeze the last idea out of your brain to get everything on paper, and then you end up with a shit ton of ideas. I don't do that. I feel like I do as many rough sketches as I need to go through to have at least 3 and ideally 5 really solid ideas. Okay, usually, so sometimes clients have no specifications for how many rough sketches they want. Some want at least 3, some want 1 to 3. But I think 3 to 5 is a good amount to aim for. So in the beginning I used to have like 7 thumbnails and so on. But now I'm like at least 3 if it's a hard one and I just get to 3 ideas that I think are solid. I'm sticking to those 3. But if I have more, then I'll try to limit it to 5, because it's also kind of your job to curate your ideas. So you just present the best ones. And how I select them is usually the following. I have at least one sketch that is super close to the brief. Sometimes you have a client that has a very specific vision already, and that sketch is essentially, that's the brief to a T. It's exactly what my interpretation is of what I think the client really wants. And if the client's very open, then that is essentially my interpretation of what I think like the safest, most solid option for this cover would be. Because in different genres you have different genre markers and different subjects that are popping up more often. There are some compositions that are just safer than others because they're just very typical book cover compositions. And I try to have one sketch in there that's just safe. It's like, it's not brilliant, but if we pick this one, it's fine. Okay? They tend to be a bit more generic because safe tends to be a bit boring usually. So there's one boring sketch in there that's like, this is solid, if all falls through, we can go with that, it's fine. It's not gonna win awards, but it's fine. And then I will also tend to have one sketch that's more out there, that's something completely different, where I'm trying something that's maybe a little bit more conceptual, playing more with symbolism. It's one where I don't think the client's gonna pick that one, but just throw it in there. And especially if I offer 5 concepts. If I offer 3 concepts, I might cut that one and just go with 3 ones that I think are just really good choices. But if I'm offering more concepts, I'm gonna have one in there that's a bit wild, just to give that option. And because sometimes that's the one the client is gonna go for. I've had that happening. and it tends to be really fun. But it's that's the fun option. That's the odd one out where you like, I had this mad idea. What do you think? So one safe, one less safe, and the other ones are just the best ones you could think of. Right, how that really looks like in my sketchbook is I tend to make little X's next to the sketches that I think have potential, and then I start working on what I'm actually going to send to my client, and that's something I do digitally. So I'll scan. I always scan my sketches, even if they're stick figures and I'm not going to use any of that. Really, it just gives me a feeling of there being something when I have those uploaded in my file, and I'm just not starting from scratch. I can always have that one in the background and then work over it, and it's just, again, it's like taking the first notes in the sketchbook. It's telling me, oh, there is something already there and I can work with that. So that's what's happening then, and I will then start working on defining the composition. I'll start adding values, tonal values, and define the general shapes in the composition. And these are still going to be pretty rough. They used to be very, very rough when I was starting out, and I've started to tighten them during recent years. Actually, this year, last week or so, I ended up sending in really rough tonal thumbnails again, and was like, my god, these are the ugliest sketches I've sent in in years. And it's so lovely because the person I work with, she was like, oh, these look so good, these are lovely, and I was like, nah, you're lying, these are awful, but thank you. Yeah, so they still need to be they need to be open enough that people can see the potential, but they don't get fixated on anything. One of my teachers in art school was like, you can't put any detail in there because then your client is gonna get fixated on the fashion choice of the character in this sketch, and there's gonna be something really stupid that can be changed, but your client might be like, no, we can't do this at all because they're wearing the wrong skirt or something. And this usually happens if you work with non-creative people who don't understand the process. So it's not gonna happen really if you're working with big US publishers, because they know what they're doing usually. So yeah, still keep them open. I like to have the values down because it gives a really good impression of what the final piece will look like, even at this very rough stage. And it's really helpful to me as well to see whether the composition works or not, and whether the atmosphere is going to work. So yeah, it's just nailing the composition and the concept essentially. And yeah, those I'm then going to send in to the client. And what I do is I put all of these little thumbnails and I put them in one file, like I'm arranging them on a piece of paper, and I'm gonna number them, or I'm gonna go like A, B, C, those are the options. And I'm gonna save that as a relatively small JPEG, and then I'm gonna put that in the email body or as an attachment to the email I'm sending my client or art director, designer. And then I'm going to write little descriptions in the email body. I'll be like, hey, here we see character X, protagonist, doing this and that, and they're, I don't know, standing in front of a castle, and the lighting is, whatever is important to understand the sketch, because I know what's on there, but I also know it's really rough, and they probably don't. They can't read my mind. So I'm gonna add a little description. Also, if I'm adding like symbolism in there or something that would be there in the final, but it just makes no sense to include it at a really rough stage, I'll add this in the description as well. Also, if I can like imagine a variant that is not worth doing another sketch for, I I'm going to add that in there as well. So essentially what I send in are both the sketches and the descriptions. They have to go together. And yeah, what another thing that I started doing because client started asking for it is sending in the sketches, the separate files, and I just send them the high-res version I'm working with, and essentially I'm just going to put them in a Dropbox, and then I'll send them the Dropbox link, and it will be like, here are the sketches, and if you need the separate files, here's a link. Because people started asking for it, and I was like, I'm just going to always do this. I've got nothing to lose, it takes no time, and clearly it's useful. Because what designers especially tend to do is they do mock-ups with the title and so on of your sketches, and then they bring those to the meetings, and it's just easier to do if they have a bigger file for the sketch and they have the separate files for the sketch. So also, I didn't say that before, when I do the thumbnail sketches in Photoshop, I sometimes come up with new ideas because I'm getting more involved with those ideas I've already had, and it's maybe the next day and I'm seeing them in a different light and I'm playing with their shapes, and sometimes just new ideas pop up. So the sketches in my sketchbook are not always the same sketches I send in. So it's a progress and process. Yeah, so let's send in. So first big milestone done, you've sent in your ideas. Right, you've sent in your first sketches, and then you wait for feedback. So another little mind trick I'm going with is when I send that email, I just stop thinking about it. I try not to think about it, let's put it this way. I'm like, this is my work, I've done it, and now the ball is, you know, on their side, and I'm just waiting, and there is nothing I can do. I do not reread the email I sent. If I forgot to add an attachment, right, which shouldn't happen. Also, it doesn't happen if you write the descriptions based on the artwork that you can see in the email, so you always know that you sent your attachment. So yeah, if you have typos in there, it doesn't matter. There's really nothing you could have written in there that was so bad that you have to write them again for some reason. Actually, if you end up writing a double email, they might, you know, it happens that an email doesn't get read and so on. So you send it. If you feel very nervous, you can do a little stress dance, and then you go do something else, right? Your work for now is done. And then they get back to you at some point, and it might take a while, with feedback. And then we talked about feedback, you apply the feedback. Usually at this stage you just choose a direction, and it's like, yeah, we take that, or it's, can you do a variant of this, or can you incorporate an element from this with this, or I saw your sketch and can you try like, I had this idea and can you try like this other version? Might happen, or it might be, I love this sketch, let's go with that one. It depends on the project, depends on the client. So next up, this is getting so long, isn't it? This is going to be so long. I'm just going to be like hours talking about this. Next step then is usually, okay, so not all artists have the same kind of style of working. Some people get a brief and they send in a final because they just love to, you know, to dare fate, I guess. If you do that, you have to keep in mind, if they don't like it, you have to do a new one, right? So my personal process is pretty standard, right? Sending in the rough sketches, and then the second part would be sending in the next stage of the process, essentially. And that is usually a more detailed sketch. Sometimes a color sketch, and sometimes you send in different color variants for them to choose. So that's usually the second one, is essentially, so in school we used to call this the layout. I don't know if that is something that's actually being used in the US book industry. I think my teacher was coming from advertising more, and so it's probably more coming from that direction, but I still call them layouts. Essentially, this is where you figure out everything, right? Because this is the last bit where you can make lots of revisions and lots of changes without having to invest a shit ton of time, right? You want to make sure that you already get your references at this point, whether you're taking them yourself or you're licensing something, or you're just kind of Frankensteining something together with, you know, references you found. So this is not a video about references. I'm not gonna go off on this tangent. So you collect the references you need at this point, right? So you figure out the poses, the expressions, all that. You figure out everything that you need to pull this artwork off. You don't have to do that at the concept stage, right? With the roughs. You just freehand that or whatever. You just let it pour out of you. But at this stage, we're tightening things. You need all the tools. You gather already all the tools you need to do the final, right? So we figured that out. We figure out all the major elements that are going to be on the artwork, and we figure out the composition. I mean, we already know the composition from the rough, but we figure out the exact placements and the exact shapes and all this, right? So you're kind of always adding something in the process. We have like the rough composition and shapes, and then you translate it into this advanced sketch where you add the details and the anatomy and getting the perspective halfway correct. So that's all in there, but you still have the general shapes from the rough, and you still have the general tonal values from the rough still in there. And because you don't have to do them again, right? You can just copy them and now you still have them for the final. But you clean things up and you make sure everything's in the right place. And ideally, when you send this one in and then you send in the final, your client is just going to be like, yeah, this is the same piece. Yeah, obviously this was going to look like this. I had it happen this year that I sent in a sketch, a detailed sketch, and then did the final, and they were like, this is not what we expected. And you don't want that to happen. It was nerve-wracking, but yeah, you don't want this to happen, and that's why you usually do this detailed sketch, and then you don't change anything while going to the final. I don't think I changed that much, but okay, and never mind. Actually, I think they compared my final to the thumbnail, because I changed things from the thumbnail to the detailed one, and then never mind, it's not about me, it's not about me and my trauma. Yeah, it was not traumatic. I just felt bad about it. Never mind. So yeah, this is the stage where everything is essentially like, this is, if your thumbnail is the compass, this is your map. And if you work for somebody else and your map is approved, you don't change things going forward. This is, you know, you get the same vibe as this sketch, and you get the same, everyone's doing the same thing. Like, sure, there are small things like in expressions and so on, like the softness in the gaze and whatnot, like those details you can't really have in a sketch and have them look this exact same in the final. But you get all the major stuff from your sketch in the final, because you don't want to have to do lots of changes to your final, right? You want to have, the process should be smooth sailing, and for that, this second sketch should already be a very good representation of what the final's gonna look like. Now, you might have to do some revisions on that one. Again, sometimes you do colors already, so you might end up, you know, sending in some color variants, and then your client's going to be like, let's go with the pink one or whatever, or the green one, or they'd be like, we'd also love to see a blue one, can you do that? And then you send in a blue variant, and you know, this is, at this stage, maybe there's something in the detailed sketch they don't like, and then you change that, because again, at this stage you can still do so much, you can still change all the things, and it takes you 10 minutes instead of, you know, 2 hours. So that's good. And when that one is approved, you just start with the final. Oh my god, it's an invasion of the fruit flies. Has somebody not taken out the trash? Who could that have been? Could that have been me? No. Yeah, so you start the final, and that's the moment we've been dreading, right? The moment we were, worried about, what if the final doesn't work? What if the final cover doesn't look good? But now you're starting it, and look at all the material you have. You have all the references already, you have your approved detailed sketch, you've already figured out the anatomy, you've already figured out most of the lighting, you've already figured out the perspective. Actually, I think the detailed sketch is the hardest part, because now we're at the final, and you just sit down. This is just the pants in seat moment. You just sit down and you render the shit out of it. Or I don't know, if you do abstract work or vector work, you vector the shit out of it. But this is the part where you just sit down and do the work to the best of your abilities. And yeah, so the way I work, because I'm both doing traditional and digital painting, and most often I do a combination of both. So for me, that would mean I'm printing out my layout, I'm transferring my layout on my watercolor to my watercolor paper. I'm doing that with a light box. I'll just drawing with my carbon pencil, and then I'll do a detailed under drawing of the cover of the artwork, and then I'll start painting, and then I'll draw on top of it, and then I paint on top of it, and then I draw on top of it, and then I think, I don't think I can get any more, I don't think I can get it to be any more better traditionally. I work at quite a large size, and I don't know, I'm working pretty roughly, I think, because I know there are artists who work with their brushes and tiny details, and I'm always like, no, I can't get any more detail than this, and it's huge lines everywhere. And while I'm working on it, I might already have areas in mind where I'm like, I don't like how the painting turned out there, but I know I can fix it. I can fix it digitally. So yeah, it's very, very chill. I think I've chosen a process for myself where you can always fix things later. So I can move on without agonizing about something. I'll just be noting it down, yeah, that will need fixing later, and that's fine. And then I'll scan it, scan the painting, and first I'll figure out the general colors and the general contrasts, and then I start painting. Honestly, I used to do very minimal editing, very minimal digital painting, but I do a lot now. I do a lot of painting now on top. So they used to be essentially finals back in the days, and now they're really just underpaintings, because I do lots of digital painting on top now. Sometimes I just do full-on digital paintings now. It depends on the project and the piece and how the sketch already looks, and whether what I feel like really. As long as it looks good in the end and looks like my style, it's all right. But I've had a year where I just worked really hard on being able to replicate my style with a completely digital process. So that's not really the problem anymore. So yeah, and then I send in the final, and I send in JPEG usually, or if I'm lazy, a screenshot. And when I'm working with big publishers, I sent in the final high-res file with the first peek at the final. With self-publishers, I tend to send in the final when it's approved. So the final file when it's approved, and ideally when I've been paid at least half of it. But with publishers, I send in the, again, final file in the Dropbox. There are layers in there where, they can blend out, they can kind of turn off some elements in the piece, so they can, play around with that. And again, they're doing their mock-ups and their design work on top. So I just sent that along, and then it's waiting and hearing back if there are any notes. If there are notes, notes, I'll do the revisions and send in the final back. If there are no notes, it's awesome, this was it, great, I will send in my invoice and get paid in 30 days. So yeah, that's it really. Ooh, my throat. So yeah, this got so long again. But I hope you got to take something away with it from it, and yeah, if you have any questions about specifics, or if there's something you feel like I should dig in more or that you didn't understand, just feel free to let me know. As you can tell, I'm happy to talk about this stuff. It's my jam. Yeah, thank you so much for watching. This has gotten so long already. Again, these are taking so long. They could be even longer. If you let me go off on any tangent I come across, these could be even longer. Oh my god. Yeah, but that was it. Fruit fly invasions. Guess who has to take out the trash next? Yeah. I'm really elevating my brand here. Professional. So yeah, thank you. I never know how to end these. Again, also thank you for all the lovely comments on my last ramblements on the ramblements. Yeah, thank you. This is fun. This is fun. Nice. Awesome. Yeah, have a lovely day. Have a lovely day.